Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Transactional Phone Skills. This is part three. Part three. I don't know. I don't think maybe I shouldn't make hand gestures. Not a good idea. Anyway, because I don't know what any of them mean. Oh, four of me. Why not take four of me? Look at that. Okay, we're back to the glasses free version of this. Okay, so we don't really have to have a phone tonight, but I wanted to show you, and maybe the day where you are, I wanted to show you this. Isn't that pretty? That's a student made me a gift basket, and this was one of the things in it, and it was really sweet because, well, a former student who's going on to do big bright things. It was really sweet because the student knows that I love bookmarks, and so there were several pressed bookmarks in there that were made by the artists at the school where I work, and I was really, really glad to get that. So I thought I'd show that. And if we do need a phone, what a great phone this makes. Look, this is the phone of the future. Look how slim that is. I bet they do turn out to be that way. Anyway, transactional phone calls, this is the third part of that. And the thing that's important, I think, to note about this is that you've overcome the most important part if you followed the advice in the other video, and that's not worrying about what anyone thinks about you or how people perceive you from a phone call, right? You are so much more than just that single moment, but the underpinning of that is that you need to produce something, right? We've been talking about it's transactional. There's something that needs to be produced out of the phone call that you're having, let's say with the bank or the doctor's office, or again with anybody from whom you've bought something and you have questions or concerns. So after you have gotten to the point where you really are not worried about the other person's perception, you're pretty free, aren't you? It feels good. It feels good. What helps to have going into these kinds of situations, now that we've talked about sort of that soft skill set, it's something, I can think of it. Let's talk a little bit about how do you get to the point of your phone call, right? We've gone over sort of some psychological, sociological issues, but how do you get to the point of your phone call? This is where a list comes in handy. And in a future video, I'm going to show you how I deal very simply with my time planning. I really don't believe we can manage time. I think we have to plan time. We're not that powerful, right? So have a little piece of paper. It can be anything, an old envelope or whatever. We used to just grab stuff and write on it. I think people probably still do that, but it's a lost art just to grab a piece of scrap paper and write on it, and then keeping it where you know where it is important. But write down the things you want to accomplish in the phone call and make them broad things, right? Not like, oh, I have to this and this and this, and I have to know this and this and this. Think about broad categories. It's almost as if you're giving a speech, but you want to be authentic, right? You're not giving a speech, but if you were giving a speech and you wanted to be really authentic in the way that you presented that, you would have some speaking points and you just glance down at them and you know your subject matter well enough that you would then be able to talk for a while about those points. So say in the phone call, you need to talk about a car repair. Ugh. Sorry, had a little moment there, but you had to need to talk about a car repair. And the main points were, I brought in the car to get it fixed, and this is the sound it was making. It's not making that sound anymore, but now it's making a new sound, and I want to get rescheduled for that, situation to bring that car back in, but I need help figuring out how to do that because my working hours are really complicated. Is there any way can somebody come pick it up? That may be a point that you want to make, but then you would just need to, was making this noise, stop making that noise, now making this noise. How am I going to get the car to you when it's difficult? Maybe you're living alone and you're the only person in your home and you don't really know very many people. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Who can help you get from point A to point B, or the people who could have their own obligations at that time. So those are really only 3 points. Right? So if you are, again, remember being in control of the productivity of the call, not the person on the other end of the line, but the productivity of the call. If you're in charge of that, if you're in control of that because you've planned out your points, if the conversation veers, you can bring it back around very gently and very kindly to the important parts of your call, right? Now, there's one little thing, because you have it all written down. There's in key points. There's one thing that I haven't shared so far that I do, and I hope you don't consider it a little naughty, but it might be considered that way. When I've had a productive phone call, and again, kindness is at the bottom of that, knowing the person's name, seeing that as a conversation and seeing that person as a complete, total human being who is worthy of your time and attention, just as you are of theirs. We're all God's children and we're all equally important, right? Never think that someone serving you means that they're in some kind of subordinate position. I know you don't think that. I know you're too kind to think that. But it doesn't mean that. It means we're doing transactional work here, trying to get everybody's needs met. The need to do a job well by being in service to your need, and your need to be a good, decent, wonderful human being, which of course you are, by showing that through the way that you deal with the person who's giving you the privilege of serving you. Right? So you're in service to that person as well. And if we all stay in service to each other and put each other first, then everybody's covered, right? I don't have to put myself first if I bring people into my life or I set boundaries in my life where people are also putting me first. Makes sense. You put me first, I put you first, and then we're both first in somebody's life, but we're never first in our own lives. And I know that may sound counterintuitive to what we're told in self-help situations or self-care situations, but we've gotten a little bit too self-centered in our culture. We need to be leading by example with service, don't we? We need to serve others in a way that makes it a pleasure and a privilege to serve us. And that's what's at the heart of this kind of transaction, is be the kind of person who, when you get off the phone, regardless of whether or not the person was particularly kind, you know that you were, and you can feel good about that. And you can make that a part of your character, not just something you do to get something you want out of a transaction. So that brings us to that naughty thing that I was talking about. Typically, if something has been particularly difficult to achieve through phone calls, or maybe this is my third or fourth phone call to deal with this thing, I'm no less kind. But if you've been a kind person and you've been understanding, and if you've, hey, may I put you on hold for a second? And you've said, that's no problem. Or, you know what, I'm going to need to call back because I've got something else going on right now. But could you give me a direct line maybe that I could get through to so that I won't stay on hold for as long again? As long as you've been kind and you're setting boundaries still at the end of the transaction. And again, this is for those that have been particularly difficult. And I'm thinking of one with a home improvement store that I had. I won't mention the name of that because I liked the store and I liked the people who worked there were really nice to me, but I never lost my temper or became impatient. I stated my boundaries very clearly. But at the end of the phone call, invariably, if you are kind and helpful but firm in your boundaries, we'll talk about boundaries more in another video, your Brene Boundaries. Look up Brene Brown. Brene Brown says that boundaries are just what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. And if you've been clear about that, that's kind of a direct quote from her, I think. If you've been that way so far, at the end of the telephone conversation, when somebody, again, invariably may ask you, is there anything else I can do to help you? Ask for something free. I never let that go if it's been particularly difficult without asking for something free. Most people who are talking to you on the phone in these service situations are empowered to give you something for free. And it can be a bargaining experience, but it can also be kind and sweet. And, usually when I ask that question, it makes people chuckle. And I don't go, I'm going to need something free. right? I say, yeah, is there any way I could get something free for my time? And they'll chuckle and go, well, let's see. I'm going to tell you this story, and we're getting on to 10 minutes here, but that's okay. It's worth it. I think you'll like it. With this home improvement store, I asked for something free at the end of what was a protracted, I mean, like 6-week experience of trying to get something straightened out. I never lost my temper. Nobody had a note on me saying this woman's difficult or any of those things. Nothing like that happened. I was kind but persistent and boundaried. And at the end of that experience, I communicated to the person. It was escalated because the person I was talking to, I didn't say, can I speak to the manager? But the person I was talking to had reached the end of what they could do about the situation. Said, you know what, I'm going to need to escalate it. And we made a joke about how that, sounded funny. And I said something about escalators and we laughed. And then I got to the next person. We'll call this person John. It rhymes with John, but that was not the person's name. Sort of rhymes with John. And John said at the end of the call, is there anything else you need to ask me or whatever? And he was in a management position. And I said, yeah, I hate to say this because it sounds so ungrateful and everyone's been so helpful. And I meant this. This is my authentic self. I'm not putting this on. I'm not manipulating anyone, right? I'm just using my authentic self to my own advantage and to other people's advantage in the future who have to call in with service things like this. I said, I really probably am not going to use the store very much anymore, if at all, because this has just taken way too much time. And, it's not your fault. You have been wonderful. But it crossed a boundary, right? We've gotten to a place where I could have graded 25 papers and given my students wonderful feedback in the time that, I've wasted on this. And I didn't say wasted. I used, kinder terminology, but the time I've spent doing this. And John said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that, John, right? And I said, yeah, I know, I'm sorry to say it, but I felt like it needed to be said because this is how long he's, and wonderful service. He said, no, you're right. It was ridiculous. This whole thing has been a ridiculously long and drawn out process. He shared some things that frustrated him about the way that their shipping department worked, that it was contracted out to third parties and that made it difficult. And then I started, we even had a little coaching session on the phone about how he might talk to his supervisors about it, because that's one of the things that I do. And life coaching is obviously talking about communication skills as we're doing here. But I'm only asking for your subscription, not for any fee, right? So we had talked at this point, and what happened was we had ordered a cabinet. My husband was renovating the kitchen, and we'd ordered a cabinet. It was a specific kind that you just can't go get out of the store. It wasn't expensive. It was just the shape and dimensions of it that were only available via shipping. And the cabinet hadn't gotten there, then it got lost, then it got damaged, then it got destroyed. By the end of this phone call, John was, first of all, sending me 2 cabinets to make sure that one got there successfully, because he acknowledged the shipping problem that the company has and the transport problem. And then charging me $1 a piece for each of them, because he was not empowered to give anything away, but he could reduce the price to $1. So I ended up, I think, paying in total $2.17 for 2 cabinets, which were worth about $300. And in order to secure my business in the future, what's the best way to make me want to come back to the store? Give me a gift card, $250 to come back to the store, because that's going to ensure that I'm going to buy something there again and maybe have a better experience. Wonderful, wonderful technique and professionalism on John's part. And I was so grateful and so thankful. I didn't go, well, I should get that because blah, blah, blah. No. Just be grateful. Just be thankful. That person you're talking to can only do that which they are empowered to do, right? So it turned out to be a wonderful I can say it, transactional experience. And as usually happens with me with these kinds of phone calls, I made some friends. I had some people ask me about going back to college when we were waiting for someone to have an answer to something. I was able to help people figure out how to fill out their FAFSA forms, the FSA form for financial aid at the federal level. I was able to talk to them about how the Pell Grants work, about how I was even able, and it's PELL grant if you're interested in going back to school. I was able to talk to them about different classes to take, about what to think about during transfer, during our downtime, because that usually happens in these phone calls. And they were encouraged to just stay on the line and talk to me while we waited when they didn't have to put me on hold. And I've gotten an email here and there from the first representative to whom I talked about her college experience and going back to college. See how that turned out? That was phenomenal, y'all. And it was all because of the choices I and the people to whom I was talking made. And you better believe we used that $250 gift card. We have an extra cabinet, which we're going to put in our younger son's room. We were able to get some additional things we needed for the renovation through the gift certificate. Everything turned out great. But again, kindness, boundaries, and patience. Sometimes things take time, but usually during the process, the deity of your choice, providence, the universe, God, will find a way to make everything work together for good for everybody involved in the situation. You just have to be the best version of yourself. And again, that takes time. I hope this little series has been helpful. Again, we're going to talk really soon about boundaries. Thank you for sticking around for so long, just watching my poorly produced, sort of amateurish approach to YouTube. But I'm going to get better. There are plans in motion to make this more produced. But what I can promise you is that I'll always be my authentic self, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor. And hopefully we're not getting married, just to be clear. But this one is a longer one, and I appreciate you. And I hope that you will come back to watch more videos. Please do like and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you don't, that's your decision, right? In the meanwhile, remember how loved you are, how important you are, how valued you are, and go in peace and love to serve others.